A lot of people know the story of the 2002 Oakland A's thanks to the 2011 film Moneyball, starring Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill. The A's, one of the poorest teams in baseball, used statistics to outsmart richer teams and make the playoffs in a special season that included a 20-game winning streak. But what if I told you that there was more to the story? That the A's were more than a garbage diving team that found some diamonds in the rough? I am Sam Winton, and I'm here to tell you the real story of why the 2002 Oakland A's were so successful. And you might be thinking, Sam, you were born in 2004. Why can you tell the story of the Oakland A's that happened in 2002? Well, first off, Moneyball is one of my favorite movies. It's definitely my favorite sports movie. It might be my favorite movie of all time. And I'm also a huge baseball fan. I've been playing baseball my entire life, watching baseball. And I'm an aspiring sports journalist. I want to cover this sport as a career. So going and researching the former stories will help me in my quest to become a journalist. So why were the 2002 Oakland A's successful? Their revolutionary use of analytics. I'm not here and I'm not going to lie to you and say that the A's weren't successful because of their analytics, because they were. But there's more to the story and more that the movie doesn't show. The A's had a three-headed pitching monster of Tim Hudson, Barry Zito, and Mark Mulder, and they also had impact bats of Miguel Tejada and Eric Chavez. So, first, analytics, also known as sabermetrics. The A's did succeed because of their analytics. Peter Brand, who is based on the real-life Paul DePodesta, believed that sabermetrics allowed them to find players that were severely undervalued. This was so important for the A's because they were so poor. The A's had a payroll of $40 million in 2002, which ranked 28th out of 30 MLB teams. If that payroll was this year, they would be $15 million behind the team in last place, which just so happens to still be the Oakland A's. Sabermetrics, developed by Bill James, is the empirical analysis of baseball, especially baseball statistics that measure in-game activity. Sabermetrics argues that on-base percentage offers the most opportunity for players to create runs and is most likely to lead to wins. This created the Athletics philosophy: find hitters who might not have the highest batting average, but do a good job of getting on base. This was revolutionary for the time because teams didn't have analytic departments like they do now. In 2002, batting average was king. Therefore, these players were a lot cheaper, but provided the same advantages to winning in the eyes of Billy Beane and DePodesta, or Brand, however you want to say it. When the A's lost their stars of Johnny Damon and Jason Giambi, the A's looked to replace their on-base percentage in the aggregate rather than trying to replace one player with their batting average, home runs, and RBIs. If you've seen the movie, this did not please the scouts at the time. They were like, Billy, what are you doing? Caused a couple guys to get fired. But regardless, this is where you get Scott Hatteberg. Hatteberg had a career 357 on-base percentage, but only hit 267. Jason's brother Jeremy had a 369 OBP while only batting 272. And Jeremy also had a lot of off-the-field issues that he was dealing with that also made him undervalued. David Justice, he was entering his 14th and final MLB season. He was old. A lot of people didn't think he could still play or field or even hit. But what did he do? He got on base. He had a career OBP of 378. And, well, of course, we wouldn't be talking about this if the strategy didn't work. And it did. The strategy worked. It revolutionized baseball. The A's won 103 games, tied for the most in baseball with, guess who? The Yankees. The big, rich Yankees and the poor A's had the same record in 2002. They also won 20 games in a row, which was the longest winning streak in baseball up until that point. The Cleveland Guardians broke that with like a 26-game winning streak. However, sabermetrics doesn't show the whole picture of the A's success. The A's had a terrific starting rotation and a three-headed monster. Tim Hudson was the Athletics ace. He was an all-star in 2000 and finished second in the Cy Young voting. In 2002, he finished with a 15-9 ERA and a 2.98 ERA with a 1.45 ERA plus. An ERA plus is basically a statistic that measures how good a pitcher is compared to the average in terms of the era and without park factor. So it's basically the baseline. It's the baseline statistic of how good a pitcher has been. compared to the average. So, with 100 being average, Tim Hudson, 45% better than the average pitcher in that era. However, he wasn't even the best pitcher for the Athletics that season. Barry Zito won the 2002 Cy Young, finishing with a 23-5 record and 2.75 ERA with a 1.58 ERA plus, 58% better than the average pitcher. Mark Mulder was also a Cy Young runner-up in 2001. He went 19-7 in 2002 with a 1.25 ERA plus. The pitching staff as a whole ranked first in the AL in ERA and had a team ERA plus of 1.18. However, if you had just watched Moneyball and not done your research, you would have never known who these three players were, basically. You see Tim Hudson a little bit. He's in the montage of the A's almost blowing the 20th and final game. He was the starting pitcher in that game. But other than that, you don't really see him, and you don't necessarily see Zito or Mulder at all. These guys would just be unheard of. And this also wasn't the end of it, as the A's had a couple of really impactful bats that also get swept under the radar, including Miguel Tejada, who won the 2002 AL MVP. Yes, the Athletics had the 2002 MVP and Cy Young, and you might not even know who they were if you haven't done your research. So, Tejada in 2002 hit 34 homers, drove in 131 runs, and slashed 308, 354, 508, and that's batting average, on-base percentage, and slugging. Eric Chavez is mentioned. I mean, these guys are both mentioned briefly. I think there's a scene with Tejada welcoming David Justice to the A's. Chavez also mentioned briefly, but not nearly the amount that they should be, as they're the major factors in why this team was so good. Chavez hit 34 homers, drove in 109 runs, and slashed 275, 348, and 513. And he had a 127 OPS plus. And OPS plus is basically just the hitter's version of what ERA plus is. So he was 27% better than the average hitter in that era, not having to deal with park factor. These two players were the headliners of what was a middle-of-the-pack Athletics offense in 2002 and weren't mentioned in depth. Now, I think Moneyball is a fantastic movie. It's one of my all-time favorites, yet the movie makes choices on what to include and what to exclude, leaving out key points about the A's pitching and hitting. When you watch a movie based on a true story, do your research. Find out the whole story, because you might be surprised at what you find is actually the whole truth.